Hello, people. How many more people have to die? Carbon monoxide kills two more in HUD housing. This just in the news. The deadly gas had filled a Michigan couple's home, but no alarm was sounding. Millions of Americans in public housing may be at similar risk. So we have public housing, but is it safe? That is the question that is posed here. How many more people have to die? And so you see a family pictured here. So Monique, Ashley Gunn, and Alicia stand outside Ashley's house. The lawn furniture was brought over from the Flemings apartment and belonged to their parents. This is by Susie Kim, Wayne, Michigan. It was already getting dark when Ashley Gunn pulled up to her parents' house with her three kids in the back seat, and none of the lights were on, which she thought was a little bit strange. So it was a bitterly cold day in February, with temperatures barely climbing out of the single digits, and on the heels of a record breaking polar vortex. Before leaving for her parents' house at the Hickory Hollow Cooperative, a federally subsidized housing complex, Gunn called her mother to tell her that she was on her way, but didn't get a response. So her mother must be busy, she thought, and she headed over anyway. Her father, Anthony Fleming, 64 years of age, would normally be sitting at the kitchen table facing the front windows, waving and smiling the moment he spotted his granddaughters. He would have already cooked their favorite mac and cheese, chicken, spaghetti, and Gwendolyn, his wife of 35 years, might have queued up the movies they'd all watch together. So the kids loved nothing better than going over to the grandparents' house, which always smelled like candles and delicious food. But Anthony Fleming wasn't at the window to greet them, and Gunn got out of the car, and her husband and kids, ages 11, 6, and 3, and they knocked on the door. No answer. She knocked again, yelling this time. Nothing. She dialed her oldest sister in panic. Something just doesn't feel right, Gunn's sister told her. So we'll call the police. So this is the couple that was pictured here. The silent killer, the rising toll of carbon monoxide in public housings. So when the officers had arrived, they broke through the back door. Minutes ticked by, and then the ambulance and fire trucks pulled up, sirens blazing. Gunn felt momentarily relieved. They wouldn't bring an ambulance if they weren't alive, she thought. The emergency responders, EMT, wheeled her father out of with a stretcher unconscious. His eyes rolled back in his head. She waited for a second, stretcher carrying her 65-year-old mother, but none appeared. And when the police finally pushed the master bedroom window all the way open, Gunn knew something was horribly wrong. In my mind, I am thinking gas, she said. Her mother was dead from the carbon monoxide poisoning. The levels in the bedroom were higher than the fire department carbon monoxide meter could measure, according to the department's incident report. So no alarms were sounding in their federally subsidized apartment. And when the firefighters entered the home, the report noted this. So the carbon monoxide detectors are the only reliable way to detect the colorless, odorless gas, but they are not required in $4.6 million of or 6 million affordable housing units overseen by Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so here's a couple pictured here. Carolyn and Anthony Fleming right here. Okay, this was them. Very sad. They seem like a very nice couple. So just a day earlier, another Hickory Hollow resident had gone to the emergency room after the fire department found elevated carbon monoxide levels in her home. City records show a similar incident happened at a complex in 2016, but the Flemings didn't know that they were at risk. Gunn broke down sobbing when the police officer pulled her aside to deliver the bad news about her mother. Her three children, who were sitting in the back seat of the car, also burst into tears when the medical examiner arrived and Gunn knew that she had to leave. I didn't want to see them bring my mother's body out of the house in a body bag, she said, and I didn't want my children to see that. Her father was soon airlifted to a hospital in Toledo, Ohio, where Gunn stayed by his bedside, but he never regained consciousness. And we went from planning one funeral to planning two funerals, Gunn said. A rising toll, like many others of their neighbors, the Flemings had moved to Hickory Hollow because they wanted a quiet, safe place to live. The complex sits on the outskirts of Wayne, a small suburb of Detroit filled with modest ranch houses, medical facilities, senior citizen homes. The townhouse style apartments in Hickory Hollow are scattered across 65 buildings in a private enclave. All have identical black shutters and tan and brick siding. The grassy ground are lined with walkways and dotted with brightly colored sculptures. A golf course is across the street, and it is a short drive to HUD Secretary Ben Carson's first childhood home. So Hickory Hollow is a co-op, so residents are shareholders in the corporation that owns the property, but they do not directly own the real estate. About a third of residents received HUD rental assistance for low-income families and had, as the Flemings, according to the HUD records, they did as well. So the property did well on its last mandatory health and safety inspection from HUD, receiving 80 out of 100 in 2015 records show. But federally inspect the federal inspectors didn't assess whether any of the homes had working carbon monoxide detectors because they aren't required by law in HUD housing. So outside of Anthony and Gwendolyn Fleming's home at the Hickory Hollow Cooperative in Wayne, Michigan, this is what it looks like. And so the cause of the carbon monoxide buildup in Fleming's home is still being determined. The police are conducting an investigation. Gunn said a local fire official told her on the night of the incident, February 1st, that this team found no carbon monoxide detectors during their walkthrough of the parents' home. A forensic engineer hired by the family attorney also found no detectors during a February 15 inspection, according to an email from an engineer reviewed by NBC News. The city of Wayne declined to confirm whether detectors were missing or answer questions about what the fire officials found. The maintenance staff told the emergency responders that chimneys across the complex had iced up and that the ice obstructions were a possible contributing factor to the cold levels or the CO levels, that is, according to carbon monoxide levels, to according to what the fire department's incident report obtained by NBC News through a Freedom of Information Act request. The early signs of carbon monoxide poisoning include as follows: dizziness, headaches, weakness, confusion, and an upset stomach, making them easy to mistake them for other ailments. So many victims die in their sleep. Emergency responders found Anthony Fleming unresponsive in an armchair. His wife was found dead in her bed upstairs, according to the fire department report. And so carbon monoxide is killing public housing residents, but HUD doesn't require detectors. So that's a related story. So this is a big problem with HUD housing, low income housing. They don't require carbon monoxide detectors. So the Flemings are part of a rising death toll from carbon monoxide poisoning in HUD housing since 2003. The gas has killed at least 13 public housing residents. By NBC News count, four since the beginning of the year. The figure is compiled from media accounts and confirmed by local authorities. Just 2 weeks before the Flemings' death, two men died from carbon monoxide poisoning in a public housing complex in Columbia, South Carolina. Public housing residents are particularly vulnerable to hazard carbon monoxide. It's especially harmful to the elderly who often have other health problems and are more likely to live in HUD housing facilities. So babies and young children are susceptible to carbon monoxide poisoning as well. So nationally, African Americans are also more likely to die from accidental carbon monoxide poisoning than other racial groups, according to 2015 study conducted by researchers from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Of the 13 HUD residents who have died from the gas since 2003, 10 were African American, and despite these deaths, HUD has been slow to address the problem. The agencies acted only after NBC was revealed of the situation, that lack of protections for millions of low-income families in the investigation this year. So last month, HUD announced that it is drafting the first federal rule requiring not only the smoke detectors do they need, but they need carbon monoxide detectors in public housing. So a process that's likely to take months, if not years, to complete. And so that should tell you something about that. Related story again, HUD moves to require carbon monoxide detectors in public housing after deaths. And so there's been some deaths that have happened because of this. And so Ben Carson, that is, has promised to make a new requirement at priority, and HUD says it is moving forward. So we don't signal our intent to do something and dilly dally. So agency spokesman Brian Sullivan said, but HUD has not given a timeline for action and could not estimate how long it would take given the steps required by federal rulemaking process. HUD only found out about the Hickory Hollow incident in early April after the resident contacted the agency. So Sullivan noted faulting the property management for failing to inform HUD about safety and health hazards that were displacing residents. The management did not respond to requests for comment. So HUD is investigating the circumstance surrounding the tragic deaths, and we are grieving the loss of Gwendolyn and Anthony Fleming. The agency said in a statement provided by NBC News, any death caused by carbon monoxide is one death too many. So this is a lovely family here with their grandchildren, and it's very sad that they were taken by this. So Anthony and Gwendolyn Fleming are with their grandchildren pictured here. And so at the Hickory Hollow, the number of deaths could have been even higher. On the night of the Flemings, that when they were found, fire officials detected elevated carbon monoxide levels in 26 units across the complex. So it wasn't just in the homes of the Flemings couple, but it was also in other people's homes that were in the same apartment building complex. So it was forcing the families to be evacuated, according to the city records obtained by way of FOIA. One of the apartments had a reading of 500 parts per million, according to the incident report, more than 3 times the level of the Consumer Product Safety Commission says can cause disorientation, unconsciousness, death, and the maximum reading on the meter scale. So that Friday night, Gunn's 3 children had been planning to stay over at the Flemings' house, their grandparents. They had a sleepover with their grandparents every other weekend. There was a giant California king bed in the master bedroom, so they all 5 would often sleep there together. And that's where the emergency responders found Gwendolyn Fleming's body. So if that incident had happened 1 day later, Gunn said, my children would have been dead as well. So how many more people have to die? The week before Gwendolyn Fleming died, her neighbor, Vanessa Daniels, began having trouble or terrible headaches. And so she said, I kept dozing off, Daniels said. She was lying in her bed and when her carbon monoxide alarm went off early Thursday morning. And then the fire department showed up and they found elevated levels of the gas throughout the two-story apartment, according to an incident report obtained by FOIA. Daniels is 63 years old and went to the emergency room with dizziness, a headache, and chest pains, and the doctor diagnosed her with exposure to gas and anxiety, according to her medical records. That night, she was afraid to fall asleep for fear that she wouldn't wake up, but she didn't have anywhere else to go. So it could have happened to me if my alarm didn't work. The next day, Daniel saw the flashing lights of fire trucks, police, and ambulance outside the Flemings' house. That hurt me to my heart, she said in tears. It could have been or could have happened to me if my alarm wasn't working. So this is Vanessa Daniels, the neighbor who looks out of her living room window at the Flemings' home at the Hickory Hollow complex. And so she says that it could have happened to her. And so the other only reason that Daniel says that she had a detector in the first place was because dangerous levels of carbon monoxide had filled her neighbor's apartment at the Hickory Hollow in November of 2016. 3 adults and a 5-year-old girl went to the emergency room on Thanksgiving Day, according to the city records obtained by FOIA. And one of the adults woke up and felt like she couldn't breathe, and her husband would not get out of bed. And the fire department said in a report nothing very high carbon monoxide levels of more than, noting very high that the carbon monoxide levels were 300 parts per million inside their home. So all of them, fortunately, they survived. So after the 2016 incident, the property managers installed carbon monoxide detectors in Daniel's apartment, she said. By the spring of 2017, they had finished installing detectors in all the 267 units at Hickory Hollow, which uses gas-fired boilers. And the property manager said in a December 2017 deposition obtained by NBC News, but no carbon monoxide alarms were sounding in the Flemings apartment when the fire department arrived February 1st, according to the incident report. The fire department said detectors were missing from 2 other apartments in the Flemings building that also had elevated carbon monoxide levels. And so the maintenance team could not advise if every unit was equipped with carbon monoxide detectors. The report said HUD will start checking for carbon monoxide detectors. Related stories. So the Fleming family is now preparing to sue Hickory Hollow Cooperative and Huntington Management, which runs the property, and Daniels is also planning a lawsuit as she believes that she is suffering from memory problems due to the carbon monoxide poisoning, which can cause permanent brain damage and elevated risk of heart disease. So another resident, Priscilla Jordan, has already sued Hickory Hollow and management company, claiming their negligence resulted in severe, permanent, irreversible harm from carbon monoxide poisoning. So Hickory Hollow Cooperative, Huntington Management, and an attorney representative both parties did not respond to the request for comment. So on the state and local level, there is a patchwork of laws and regulations that require detectors, but protections are limited. Enforcement is spotty, and some places have no requirements at all. So for those of you living in public housing or subsidized housing, check to see if you have smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors, and those detectors need to be working properly. So Michigan passed a law in 2808 requiring detectors for new and remodeled homes. For instance, the city of Wayne requires carbon monoxide detectors in homes when they are sold, and in rental housings as well, which must be inspected every 3 years. But Hickory Hollow is not subject to the same schedule of rental inspections since it's a housing cooperative, not a traditional rental property, and the last city inspection of the Flemings home was in 2007. So before the city's carbon monoxide requirement went into effect, according to Michael Button, the city's engineering manager, given such limited protections, residents questioned why HUD had not acted more quickly to require working carbon monoxide detectors in public housing. That should be your top priority. You would think there should be no question, Daniel said, so the cost to put that in shouldn't even measure up to losing a life. Housing advocates are now urging HUD to move quickly on this plan to require carbon monoxide detectors. The agency has yet to release a proposed rule, the first step in the long process of creating new regulation. Congress could also take action, and bills introduced in the House and the Senate would require detectors in all federally assisted housing and provide $10 million for installing them. But neither chamber of Congress has moved forward with the proposals as of yet. So, how many more people have to die under the governor's watch, our government's watch? I say governor. So, which pretty much is it. It's the same thing, the government's watch. So, said Representative Jesus Chuy Garcia, District of, I believe it's Illinois, who co-sponsored the House bill, So a Safe Home. Gwendolyn Fleming was raised in a Detroit public housing project that was torn down just a few years ago due to deteriorating conditions. So, having grown up poor, she always hammered away on the importance of education to her three daughters. She and her husband both worked full time to pay for things and for her family, and they struggled to afford, when she was growing up, new clothes instead of hand me downs or a Disney World vacation. She was a certified surgical technologist. Anthony Fleming worked as a shipping clerk and then became a maintenance technician at the Children's Hospital. So Anthony Fleming was a big man with a booming voice that rang out when he yelled, and he rarely stayed angry for long. I remember him disciplining us, then taking us to the mall afterward because he felt bad taking us to the movies. His daughter, Alicia Greer, 34, said, so when the girls' mother had to work late, their father washed their hair, put their hair up in ponytails, and he cooked dinner for them every night. And all three daughters graduated from college, and Greer now does medical billing for a cancer laboratory in Texas, and Gunn is a secretary supervisor at a high school near Detroit. And Monique Jelks is 48 and is an operations manager at the Indianapolis hospital. So this is the family pictured here as the girls are now adults. It's a lovely family, and so it's sad that their parents died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Shouldn't have happened. And so what you see here pictured up top was Ashley, Monique, Alicia with their parents Gwendolyn and Anthony Fleming, who their grandparents died of carbon monoxide poisoning. But the couple faced mounting financial pressures as they grew older, especially after Anthony Fleming hurt his back in 2011, was forced to quit his job, according to Gunn, and through the Section 8 program, they received federal assistance to afford a place to live out of their retirement years. They paid $570 a month for their two-bedroom apartment at Hickory Hollow, according to a copy of 2013 housing agreement obtained by NBC News. HUD covered the rest, and then from the outside, Hickory Hollow was built in 1971. It looked clean and well kept Families like the Flemings took pride in tending to their homes and adding personal touches, and there are strict rules governing anything from visitors parking to trash collection. So it's a small community. There's not a lot of crime or anything like that. Joe said, my parents felt very comfortable moving there, but some residents also grumbled about aging appliances and maintenance delays, according to the interviews with Daniel Jordan and the Flemings' children. About 2 weeks before the incident, their parents complained that their boiler was old and there was no maintenance on it for a long time, Gunn said. So the boiler itself was blackened with soot, according to the photos provided by NBC News by Matthew Curtis, an attorney for the family, who alleges that the poor maintenance, poor ventilation, and the poorly functioning old boiler unit were responsible for the fatal levels of carbon monoxide as well. So Gunn believes Washington would have been far quicker to protect families from carbon monoxide poisoning had the previous deaths happened in a wealthier community or wealthier um, elderly adults. Instead, these are low income people, and it's almost like we don't care about them, she said. So those are still lives, and those are still people that are loved. So are they still in heaven? So the Christmas decorations are still up in the Flemings' back patio, hanging over the white gardening gloves that Gwendolyn Fleming left behind. As she had just stepped into the house for a moment, by now she would have planted her spring flowers, and her husband would have been itching to start up the grill. And so instead, Gunn's 3-year-old burst into tears every time she hears an ambulance or fire truck calling out Gigi, Gigi. So the family's nickname for their grandmother was Gigi. So are they still in heaven? She keeps asking her mother, can we go visit them? And so this was really hard for this family to come to the reality that their grandparents had lost their lives through this horrible ordeal. So Gwendolyn Fleming was buried with a pillow covered with pictures of her grandchildren, which Gunn tucked inside her casket. She left behind a letter for her husband, and since she always sensed that she die first, as well as gifts for each of her 5 grandchildren, a collection of special coins, a $2 bill, and other quirky objects she thought they'd like. Gunn's daughter Nina, 11, put the keepsakes in the shoebox in the room, so it makes me feel happy and safe, she said. So on her desk, she has a page torn out of her journal, dated a few days after the funeral. So after losing 2 grandparents, it's hard for me to focus on some things, Nina wrote. So this is Alicia Gunn, who sits with her daughters, Nina left, and Malia under a blanket that belonged to her late grandmother, Gwendolyn Fleming, decorated with the names of the 5 grandchildren. So the Flemings are buried in a tree-lined Detroit cemetery less than 3 miles from the housing project where Gwendolyn Fleming grew up. And Gunn and her sisters say that they are barely allowed themselves to grieve, focusing instead on legal matters, logistics, and paperwork, and running after their own children. But then there are moments when everything breaks open. So Gunn recently found a video clip from her sister Alicia's wedding in 2016. She and her 2 sisters were all on the dance floor during the reception when her mother decided to join them. Go, Mama, go, her daughter shouted as Gwendolyn Fleming raised her arms and shouted and started dancing. So watching the clip, Gunn was overcome. My mom had on the pretty purple dress, she recalled. It was the same dress that we buried her in. Correction. At the end of this article, it says May 3rd, 2019. An email alert message that linked to this article misstated The timing of deaths of carbon monoxide poisoning public housing. At least 13 residents have died of carbon monoxide poisoning in HUD housing since 2003, not 2013. So that is pretty much the article, and I'm panning it up. It's a sad story, but this is what happened to this family, and it's sad that this happened to these people that live in HUD housing, that this is a huge problem, and I'm believing that this is a problem not just in Detroit, Michigan, but probably in many other places as well. And so we will leave this. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for listening.